And in this last slide deck for this unit, we're going to talk about Active Directory rights management. So rights management service allows you to secure data by controlling how a document is used. So this takes authentication and authorization one step further. By default, with most applications, with Active Directory, the way we most commonly restrict access is at the file level, and that's pretty much where we stop typically. In other words, we could define what someone can do with a file, but what they can do is limited to either read, write, or execute. That's pretty much it, right? Is read, write, and execute. But what rights management service allows us to do is more granularly control exactly what someone can do with that. So not only can somebody maybe have read-only access to a Word document, but we could also define whether they can print it, whether they can save it as a different copy, whether they can email it to someone, whether they can copy it into another application, and so forth and so on. So it can really restrict what someone can do. So if you have a very sensitive document that you didn't want people to be able to print and take outside the building, then you could use rights management service to do that. Now the thing is, in order for rights management service to work, your applications have to be aware of AD-RMS. They have to be integrated with that. So if, for example, somebody ran an application that was not rights management aware, then it would not be able to restrict that access. So it doesn't work natively with the file itself. In other words, if I take a Microsoft Word document and and I say this is a sensitive document and somebody shouldn't be able to print that, if somebody goes and opens that with an application that's not RMS aware, then it's not going to know that, and it's going to let somebody print it anyway. But that takes us back to, we talked about group policy. We talked about how we can limit what applications users can use. So if we know that we have sensitive information, we don't want people to use their own word processor because it won't be integrated with something like RMS, we can define that in our group policy so that our policy in general would be you have to use Microsoft Word because it integrates with RMS, and we can control how these documents are used. And sensitive documents can't be released or used inappropriately. So some of the applications you'll find in the Microsoft ecosystem that support this will be Microsoft Office, Exchange for emailing, and SharePoint, which is a document management system from Microsoft. So some of the features, you have ADFS integration, which we just got finished talking about, right? So this integrates with ADFS. In other words, that would allow RMS to work outside your organizational boundary. So if you had another organization with which you do business that they also use RMS, they would be able to, you would be able to basically use ADFS as an intermediary to control the access to these documents. There's the AD-RMS server self-enrollment, support for mobile devices, administrative role delegation. In other words, you can have administrative functions that you can delegate to other people to manage AD-RMS. So the AD-RMS environment consists of several components, usually set up as separate servers. You have the AD-RMS server, and then you have an AD-RMS database server, the Active Directory domain controller, which of course we've already been talking about, and AD-RMS enabled client computer. So AD-RMS role has some requirements. The domain member server must be prepared for the AD-RMS role. You have to create a regular domain user account to be used as the AD-RMS service account. So you have to have basically an Active Directory user that's going to run the service, because the service has to have access to resources on the domain in order for this to work. So it has to be you can't just use the NT authority account as the service, which is by the default when you install a service. You have to make sure that the user account for installing AD-RMS has the right to create a new database in SQL Server, because AD-RMS is going to use Microsoft SQL Server if you use an external database. You have to have an external database, or you don't have to, but if one is used, you have to install the database server before you install AD-RMS, so it has a place to set up the tables and get configured. So this would be something like Microsoft SQL Server. You have to create a DNS CNAME record for the AD-RMS cluster's URL. And if you recall, we had to do the same thing for Federation services, right? So we also had to use CNAMEs for the Federation service. So once you're ready to install AD-RMS, you're going to install the role and the required role services in the Server Manager, very similar to how you install any other role in Microsoft Windows. And then you're going to set up the setting up of AD-RMS takes considerable planning and pre-installation tasks. And those steps are outlined in your textbook. I didn't want to waste a lot of time here in the PowerPoint going through that. So ADRMS uses 4 types of certificates to identify. You have servers used in ADRMS, client computers, and then users and computers. So there are 4 certificate types: the server licensor certificate, rights account certificate, client licensor certificate, and the machine certificates, which is for the computer. So an ADRMS license is a specific type of certificate used to determine the rights a user has to publish or access protected documents. So RMS has 2 types of licensing. You have a publishing license and a use license. So a publishing license allows you to publish documents that are going to have rights and set those rights, and then you have a use license which allows you to use those documents. So ADRMS SCP, or Service Connection Point, is defined during the installation of the ADMRS root cluster. It allows domain members to discover the ADRMS cluster automatically. So you can perform the following SCP management tasks in the SCP tab of ADRMS Properties dialog box. You can register the SCP, you can change the SCP or remove the SCP. And again, SCP is the Service Connection Point, which is what allows clustering to work. We're going to talk about clustering in more detail later on in this course when we talk about high availability. So I'll revisit exactly what clustering is, but it's basically when you're running multiple servers providing the same service in either a distributed way or through some kind of load balancing mechanism. So if you uninstall ADRMS before removing the SCP and need to install it again, you can remove the SCP by using the add scp register.exe command line tool. So the SCP is stored in Active Directory. Only domain member clients have access to it. So if you want a non-domain member client to access the ADRMS cluster, you have to modify the registry of the client computer in order to allow it to do that. So rights policy template enables you to configure policies for determining who can access a rights protected document and what actions can be taken with that document, which is really the whole point of all this, right? So to create a rights policy template, you're going to open the ADRMS console, scroll down to the middle pane, and then click the Manage Rights Policy Templates link in the Tasks section. And in Distributed Rights Policy Templates window, you're going to click Create Distributed Rights Policy Template. And this is what it looks like. So this is how you would create the template. And of course, if you scroll down under Rights to Anyone, so if you see that right there in the middle, when you scroll down, this is where you'll see those more granular rights, things like being able to print or being able to copy and so forth. You can set the expiration for the policy, and there's a couple other options in there as well. So an exclusion policy enables the administrator to prevent specific users, ADRMS client versions, or other applications from interacting with the ADMS content. This is configured in the ADRMS console by clicking on the exclusion policies node on the left pane. I'm not exactly sure where or how or why you would do exclusion, but you can do this. So I'm not entirely sure why you do that though. But you can certainly do some research and Google that probably and figure that out. But so working with trust policies, if you already have established a federated trust through ADFS, which we just talked about previously, you might want to share ADRMS content between the trusted organizations. So there are 3 types of trust policies that you configure with ADRMS. There's trusted user domains, trusted publishing domains, and federated identity support. So again, we have users and publishing, and then the federated identity support. Users are people that are going to access these documents, and the publishers are people that publish the documents and define what permissions are allowable for that document. So a TUD establishes or a trusted user domain, establishes a trust between an ADRMS cluster in separate forests, so that users in the trusted forest can access ADRMS content in the other trusting forest. So again, this is where you have either different organizations or an organization with multiple forests being able to access each other's content and still be able to leverage ADRMS. So trusted publishing domains allows an ADRMS cluster to issue use licenses for content published by another ADRMS cluster. So the steps to establishing a TPD are similar for those to establishing a TUD, except you start with the trusting domain, export the trusted publishing domain file on the trusting ADRMS client, and then import the publishing domain file to the trusted RDMS cluster. So it does support federated identity. So if ADFS is installed, so here we go, back to ADFS. As I said in the beginning, these are tangentially related. ADFS sometimes is required for AD rights management to work. So the process is outlined in the text on how to integrate ADFS with ADRMS. So again, I'm not going to go through all the steps here. But once you have ADRMS installed, you might have to back up and restore ADRMS. So the backing up of ADRMS involves backing up the database. So you're probably going to use a Microsoft SQL Server as the database. So you would just back up that database regularly, and you can export the trusted publishing domain file and storing the cluster key password in a safe place. If you need to restore an ADRMS configuration, you would restore the databases and redeploy the ADRMS role. So basically, you restore the database, you redeploy the role, you tell it where the database is, it's going to find the database is already there, and it's going to continue working. But during the installation, you choose the option to join to an existing cluster. You supply the location of the configuration database and the cluster key password, which you would have saved when you did when you back everything up. And then you import the trusted publishing domain file, and you're good to go. And it'll be back online. And that's it. So we talked about how to install and configure ADFS, which is used for authentication to third-party applications and for single sign-on. It works outside your organization, and this would allow you to integrate with third-party services, as we discussed. We also discussed ADRMS, which allows you to add additional permissions for files, and this is one of the key ways we can enforce policies that will help prevent data leakage. So we talked about that as well. We talked about how ADRMS works and how to maintain it and do backups and so forth. So that's it for Unit 5.